Let's look at the histology of the stomach. This is the microscopic configuration of the stomach, and this will help us to explain some gross presentation of how the histological features of the stomach are presented to suit the functions that they exhibit. The mucosal lining of the stomach is thrown into infoldings, which are called gastric folds or rugae. Going through this lecture, we would be able to explain why this presentation does occur. Also, some metabolic activities that the stomach exhibits, such as breaking down of food substances, and also the process of sterilization. All this will also be explained using the histological basis. We also have the process of food mixing. This occurs because the wall of the stomach is made up of smooth muscles that are in layers, and this helps to mix the gastric content due to its peristaltic movement, and also help to push down the gastric content down the GI tract. So this lecture is going to use the microscopic expression of the stomach to explain all this presentation. So the wall of the stomach is made up of 4 layers. We have the mucosal layer, which is the most innermost layer, and this is the mucosal layer. Then we have the submucosal layer, which is the layer that is seen below the mucosa layer, and this is the submucosa layer. Then the next layer is the muscularis layer. This is the layer that is made up of bulk of smooth muscle, and this is the muscular layer, the layers of muscles that are seen one on top of the other. Then finally, we have on the most external part, we have the serosa layer. This is a thin membrane that tends to cover the entire stomach, and this is the most external layer. These are the microscopic layers of the stomach. So when a section of the stomach is cut and processed into a histological section, this is the kind of presentation that will be expressed. So let's go through each of the layers to see what they are structurally made up of. For the mucosa layer, we say that the mucosa layer is the most internal layer, and this layer is made up of simple columnar epithelium, which means that a single layer of columnar type of cells arranged in a single row. Simple columnar type of epithelium are secretory type of epithelium. If you look at this epithelium, they are larger than the cuboidal and the squamous type of epithelium. So more space is created within it for secretion to take place. If you check my lecture on the epithelium, you see where this is explained, and that is what is seen in the mucosal lining of the stomach, but as seen in folds. So you see a kind of elevation and depression that is created by this epithelium. Also, to add that the pattern by which the simple columnar epithelium is configured also contributes to the formation of the rugae, which tends to present a form of elevation and depression in the gross presentation of the stomach. And also, this simple cuboidal epithelium creates the gastric pit. The gastric pit is formed by the 2 elevations that are created by the simple columnar epithelium. So if you look at this elevation and the other elevation, you see that there's a pit in between, and this is the gastric pit. Deep to the gastric pit, we have the gastric gland. So the substances that are produced within the gastric gland will pass through the gastric pit, then it will finally be emptied into the internal space of the stomach. And that is the path by which it goes. So the gastric pit is like a canal or a channel through which substances that are being produced by the gastric gland will be able to pass before they are finally released into the internal wall of the stomach. So for the gastric gland, the gastric glands are usually about 4 to 5 in number, opening into each gastric pit. So each gastric pit will receive secretion from 4 to 5 gastric glands. We have a number of cells seen within the gastric gland. We have the mucous cell, and this is the mucous cell. From the name mucus, it means they secrete mucus. So they secrete mucus, and the mucus is being released into the internal wall of the stomach. We also have the chief cell. The chief cell, from the name, it takes the bulk of the gastric gland. The chief cells are seen more around the base of the gastric gland. They are more populated in this region. Now, what it does is that it's responsible for the production of pepsinogen and also lipase. Also, for us to know that the production of pepsinogen and lipase is secreted by the chief cell in an inactive form. So these secretions are inactive. But what makes them to be active is the hydrochloric acid that is secreted by the parietal cell, and that is the next cell we'll go to. So this is the chief cell highlighted in red. Then the next cell is the parietal cell. Parietal cells are responsible for the production of hydrochloric acid and also intrinsic factor. So this is the parietal cell. What they secrete is the HCl and intrinsic factor. We said that the HCl that is secreted by the parietal cell will help to activate the enzymes that are secreted by the chief cell. So when they are secreted by the chief cell, they tend to be inactive at that stage until when the hydrochloric acid will help to activate them. And then at that stage, they can begin to break down food substances as they are designed to. The hydrochloric acid help to destroy bacteria and other harmful species or organisms in the stomach. So it helps to sterilize the gastric environment. The intrinsic factors are necessary for the absorption of vitamin B into the body. Then we have the last group of cells, the enteroendocrine cell. This is the enteroendocrine cell. This cell is responsible for the production of hormone that helps to control digestive processes that occur within the stomach. So these are the list of the cells that we see, and you see them lining the wall of the gastric gland. After producing the substances of the different cells, they will be released through the gastric pit, and it is through this pit that they are now finally emptied into the internal wall of the stomach. Then the metabolic processes can be initiated. Also to add that under the mucosal layer of the stomach, we have two other substructures. We have the lamina propria, and this is the lamina propria. You see the lamina propria seen as a structural component of the mucosal layer of the stomach. This is a deposit of connective tissue that tends to be very thick. And the justification of being thick is for it to act like a barricade. We know that the gastric gland secretes acid. So this acid is prevented from going down into the substance of the stomach through this barricade that is created by the lamina propria. And that is why the lamina propria is very thick, so as to prevent the passage or the movement of the hydrochloric acid down into the substance of the stomach. Then we also have an underlying Muscularis mucosa. This is the Muscularis mucosa. That's the muscular component of the mucosal layer. We also have other muscular layer which will be discussed during this lecture. But for this muscular layer is a structural component of the mucosal layer because you see it just inferior to the lamina propria. This muscular layer tends to give like a structural support for the lamina propria. The Muscularis mucosa layer highlighted in red is made up of smooth muscle seen in two layers. So we have the inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. So these two layers help in propelling or expelling the substances secreted by the gastric gland. So after secretion by this gastric gland, whatever that is secreted will be released into the gastric pit, and this is supported by the Muscularis mucosa segment of the mucosal layer. So it helps to contract the gland, thereby helping to release its content or its secrets through the gastric pit. So this is one of the essence of the Muscularis mucosa segment of the mucosal layer. So these structures are altogether referred to as the mucosal layer of the stomach. As a structural component of the mucosal layer, we have the lamina propria and the Muscularis mucosa. These are also seen to run in folds, and these tend to also contribute to the formation of rugae because of the pattern of foldings that they present. This rugae is more pronounced when the stomach is empty and it gradually thins out or disappears. So it allows for expansion as it disappears. If you look at the histological section that is presented here, you see that we have the gastric pit. This is the gastric pit. And distal to the gastric pit, we have the gastric gland. Within the wall of the gastric gland, we have a number of cells that are seen within this wall that tend to secrete different substances, as we have highlighted here. So this is the gastric gland. You have the lamina propria. This is the lamina propria, which tends to be very thick and tends to create like a structural barricade, just preventing substances that are released by the gland to penetrate down into the substance of the stomach. Then more external to the lamina propria, we have the Muscularis mucosa, which is a smooth muscle type that is seen external to the lamina propria. These structures are all taken as part of the mucosal layer of the stomach. So this is what is presented. Then going further, we have the submucosa. The submucosal layer is a layer that is seen below the mucosal layer. And this is the submucosal layer. This submucosal layer is structurally made up of loose connective tissue. We also see blood vessels and nerves within this region. So you see it below the mucosal layer. This submucosal layer is also thrown into folds, and this also tends to contribute to the formation of rugae, as seen in the gross presentation of the stomach. So when we see the internal lining of the stomach, we see that they are thrown into folds. So we see that the major structural components of these folds are the mucosal layer and also the submucosal layer. So these two layers are responsible or contribute to the formation of the rugae that is seen within the internal wall of the stomach. And for this histological section, we have the submucosal layer distal to the muscularis mucosa segment of the mucosal layer. So you see distal to it. This is the submucosal layer. Then more external to the submucosal layer, we now have the muscularis layer. Remember, we talked about the muscularis mucosa, which is a structural component of the mucosal layer, and this is highlighted in red. So after the submucosal layer, we now have the main muscular layer of the stomach that is made up of smooth muscle, and they are in 3 layers. So the first one is the oblique muscle. The oblique muscle runs in an oblique pattern, and it is the most innermost, and it tends to be unique with the stomach. If you look at the other muscular layer of the GI tract, you see that it is only in the stomach that we have the oblique layer. And this is the oblique layer seen after the submucosal layer. Then after the oblique layer, we have the circular layer. This circular layer is the middle layer, and it's circular because it runs in a circular pattern. So it tends to be greatly thickened at the regions where we have the sphincters. So the circular layers are the ones that are responsible for the formation of the sphincters that is seen around the stomach. If you look back in our lecture on the anatomy of the stomach, remember we talked about sphincters, which helps to control the passage of food to and fro the stomach. So this sphincters is formed as a result of thickening of the muscularis layer of the stomach. And the specific layer that is responsible for this is the circular layer. And this is the circular layer. Then more external, we have the longitudinal layer, and this is the longitudinal layer. You can see the fibers running in a longitudinal pattern, and it is the most external layer. And these layers are responsible for periodic contraction and relaxation. So as they contract and relax, they present a form of peristaltic movement, which tends to help mix the gastric content. This muscularis layer can also be referred to as the muscularis externa. Remember, we said we have a muscularis mucosa layer, which is highlighted in red as part of the structural component of the mucosa layer. While more external to this muscularis mucosa, we have the muscularis layer, which is more external to the muscularis mucosa. So this can also be referred to as the muscularis externa. Then more external to the muscular layer, we now have the serosa layer. This is a thin layer that is seen on the external part of the stomach. And what it is histologically made up of are simple squamous epithelium. That's flat type of epithelium seen in single layer. And this is what is presented here. And if you look at this diagram, you see that the most external layer is the serosa layer. The serosa layer is coated in serous fluid, and that is why it appears shiny. If you look at this image, you see that it's shiny in appearance. And what this does is that it helps to lubricate the surface of the stomach, thereby helping to reduce friction between the stomach and the other organs within the abdominal space. So thanks for watching. Let's meet again.